Good morning, class. I hope you're enjoying your Labor Day weekend. This is week 3, chapter 2 lecture of Intro to Soc. And it seems I either am doing something wrong or my internet connection is indeed very weak because I still cannot upload the lectures to YouTube. It gets to about 95, 96% complete and then it tells me it failed and I just keep going back and forth with it. So this means I must be lucky in my office when I try to upload because it seems to always work in my office. But overall, this also means lectures will be uploaded Monday mornings, except for this week. I don't go to work tomorrow, Monday, so I will upload the lecture Tuesday morning. So your quizzes have been graded and should be released back to you by Moodle. So let me know if this is not the case, but everything seems to be working. I was able to see your grades, I was able to see your answer choices, so everything should be working. Because of the delay in uploading lecture, I will release only one forum due on Thursday, and our quiz should be on schedule with a Thursday morning release. So this week, Chapter 2 very much mirrors the Upper Division Methods of Research course I teach. I love teaching that course. It's a very fun course. So this week, I'll give you a crash course on how to do research using some hypothetical and a little bit silly examples. It's using all fake data, but nevertheless, I can use it to give you a nice crash course. So this is the premise. Which is the cleaner sex? So NIH, the National Institutes of Health, have commissioned you, you, to find out which is the cleaner sex, females or males. So I'm pretty sure you're used to this around fall, October, November. You start hearing a lot of get the flu vaccine, get the flu shot. You see it at Walgreens, Walmart, even on campus. Because every year, the flu virus begins to spread around fall, winter. It's always a new strain of the virus. That's why you always have to get, every year you have to get a flu shot. And there's a hypothesis NIH wants to test. So this is their hypothesis. After using the restroom, which of the two sexes washes their hands most often, which could possibly reduce the spread of the flu? So that's it. That's their hypothesis. And you are being paid $25K to test their hypothesis and report back to them. But you only have 1 month to test your hypothesis, and I'm pretty sure UTEP will give you permission to conduct research on campus, as long as it's ethical. So we're talking about the restroom, so having cameras in the restroom to watch people is already unethical. It's out. You can't do that. So we got to figure out another way to do this. But still, let's set up our research. So going back to last week, let's set up our independent and dependent variables. Our independent variable is washing hands. Our dependent variable is spreading the flu. So is this a positive or negative relationship? It's negative. As the frequency of washing hands increases, the spread of the flu decreases. But also keep in mind, we also want to see if washing of hands differs by sex, if there's a difference or no difference, and if there is a difference, which sex washes their hands more often or most often. So as the frequency of washing hands increases, the spread of the flu decreases. Is this causation or correlation? It's correlation. Because other variables could stop the spread of the flu. Or you could also argue other variables could still spread the flu. So even if someone were to always wash their hands after using the restroom, they could still share a drink with someone who has the flu. They could be sneezed on by someone who has the flu. Or they could eat food prepared by someone who did not wash their hands after using the restroom, and perhaps the restroom was contaminated with the flu virus. So rarely do we have causation, almost always correlation. Causation implies because of X, Y occurs, and only because of X, Y occurs. That's rare. It's very rare that one thing will cause something else to occur, and only that one thing will cause the second thing to occur. It's usually correlation, correlated. In the presence of this variable and other variables, you could spread the flu. So just think about our restroom example. We're also assuming that the restrooms are contaminated with the flu virus. Because even if someone does not wash their hands after using the restroom, it's not guaranteed the flu will spread. Perhaps somebody uses the restroom's already contaminated with the flu virus. This person touches everything that is contaminated in the restroom, does not wash their hands, and then is able to spread the flu by perhaps putting their hands on your face, preparing your food, etc., etc. So other variables have to kick in for this to truly work. The spreading of the flu just by not washing your hands after using the restroom. It's rare and it's almost comical to believe just by not washing your hands after using the restroom, automatically you will contract the flu virus and you will spread the flu virus. It's comical, it's funny, it's rare, it's not likely to happen. But in the presence of other variables correlated, perhaps it could happen. So as good researchers, you should also question why washing hands after using the restroom would be correlated with preventing the spread of the flu. So as good researchers, you might ask, well, wouldn't washing hands frequently, regardless of using the restroom, be more effective? Or not shaking hands during flu season? Or wearing a mask? But we can test our hypothesis to find out if there is indeed a correlation between washing hands after using the restroom and spreading the flu. That's the whole point of this. We want to test our hypothesis. But we also have to keep in mind, it's not just spreading the flu. We also want to find out if one sex over another sex washes their hands more often. So, how are we going to do this? Remember, we need to perform ethical research. So, should we just give UTEP students, staff, and faculty surveys? How often do you wash your hands? Take this survey. I just saw you leave the restroom. Take this survey. How would you feel if you knew somebody was watching you go into the restroom and then as soon as you came out, you were given a survey? And again, a survey does not mean that somebody has to take your survey. It's a survey. You're giving surveys all the time. If you check your UTEP email, quite often you're bombarded with surveys. And also when you walk through the union, if you ever walk through the union, sometimes people are there trying to stop you and ask you questions. You don't have to take the surveys. It does nothing to you academically. You don't lose funding. You don't get a bad grade on a class if you refuse to take a survey. So should we be intrusive? Should we have people stand inside the restrooms and keep track of who washes their hands? How would you feel about that? You went into the restroom and next to the sink, somebody was watching you and keeping track of you? Or should we do something where people are not aware of what we're doing? Should we just measure the amount of soap and paper towels used throughout a typical day? With the assumption being, if the female's restroom has very little soap and very little paper towels, at the end of the day, perhaps we measure at the beginning of the day and then we measure again at the end of the day, can we assume then that females wash their hands more often than males? So which of these three would you support doing? Again, you only have 1 month. You need to be ethical, but you also want to have some nice data to report to NIH. So regardless, whichever method we decide to use, we have to make sure our methods are reliable and valid. The book talks about this a little bit, but I'll give you another silly example. My car has 2 gauges, and I'm sure your cars do as well. A speedometer and a fuel gauge. A speedometer is reliable. It tells me how fast I'm going. Very reliable. But can it also tell me how much fuel my car has? Well, maybe. If I drive very fast, I can assume I'm using lots of fuel. So a speedometer is reliable to tell me my speed, but well, it's kind of silly to assume it's also valid in telling me how much gas I have. And now let's look at the fuel gauge. So if my fuel gauge was perhaps mid-tank and it's quickly approaching E, can I assume I'm going very fast? What if your speedometer were to break? and you were just looking at your fuel gauge. And you said, oh, well, my fuel gauge is going towards E very quickly. I assume I'm going very fast. You think that's always the case? Probably not. So your fuel gauge is reliable in telling you how much gas you have, how much fuel you have. But it's probably not valid to assume the more fuel you consume, the faster you're going. Because you could be in your driveway, put your car in park, and just step on the gas. You'll start using fuel, but you'll go absolutely nowhere. You're going 0 miles per hour. So the point is, make sure that whatever method you use, make sure it's reliable and it's valid. It's really measuring what it's supposed to be measuring, and it measures it consistently. So going back to washing hands, should my survey simply ask, hey, how often after using the restroom do you wash your hands? And have a nice Likert scale. Do you always wash your hands? Do you sometimes wash your hands? Do you never wash your hands? But then be careful on these types of questions because social desirability will kick in. I can assume if I were to give out 100 surveys asking this specific question, how often after using the restroom do you wash your hands? More likely than not, students, faculty, staff will answer always. I always wash my hands because of social desirability. This is something that's frowned upon in society. You don't wash your hands? That's gross. What do you mean you don't wash your hands? That's disgusting. So whether you really wash your hands or you don't wash your hands, you'll report to people, I always wash my hands. You want to be liked. You want to be doing behaviors that are accepted in our society. Do you drink a lot? No, never. I rarely drink. Perhaps you're even giving out a survey at a bar. How often do you drink? Even if a person has a drink in their hand, they tend to downplay how much they're drinking. No, my first drink, my only drink. I rarely drink. You want to be liked by other people. How often do you pick your nose? Never. I never pick my nose. Again, you want to be liked. Social desirability. So you have to be a little bit careful if you write your survey in this fashion. How often after using the restroom do you wash your hands? You're probably going to get very tainted data. People don't like to report things that are undesirable. So social desirability will kick in. So what about this? What about not talking to anybody, but we just show up to the restrooms in the mornings and then again in the evenings, in the afternoons? So I just measure the amount of soap and paper towels used at the end of a typical day. What do you think is wrong with this method? Well, what if we're not keeping track of how many people go into certain restrooms and for one reason or another, more females use the restroom in a typical day than males? So just in the presence of more females, more bodies going into the female restroom, the assumption is more soap and more paper towels will be used at the end of the typical day. Has nothing to do with females being cleaner, just more females. And perhaps the male restroom, in a typical day, we see 1 or 2 males use that restroom. Where in a typical day, that same area, the female's restroom, perhaps now we have 100 females going in. So it's not that females are more likely to use or wash their hands and use soap and paper towels. It's just the sheer amount of bodies going in. Or what if it's the same amount of bodies going in? We go in at 7 o'clock in the morning, we measure both restrooms, measure the amount of soap and paper towels, and we forget about everything and we just have somebody keeping track of the amount of bodies going in. And at the end of the day, the person keeping track of the bodies reports back to us. 100 males went to go use the male restroom, and 100 females went to go use the female restroom. And we measure the soap, and we say, oh wow, so I guess the cleaner sex is actually the females because they have less soap and less paper towels. Another thing that could possibly be happening is, what if during that time period, the cleaning staff refilled the soap and the paper towels in the male restroom? So that variable just threw off our data. The cleaning staff went in, refilled the soap, refilled the paper towels. At the end of the day, we go, oh, well, it's actually the males are not the cleaner sex because they have more soap, they have more paper towels. They were less likely, our assumption is they were less likely to wash their hands. But another variable kicked in, the cleaning staff. So you have to be mindful when you're doing this type of research, when you're not really observing people do something. Because one, if you're not keeping track of the restrooms, if all we're doing is going in at 7 a.m. and then again at perhaps 5 p.m. or 7 p.m. at the end of the day, we may not be aware that perhaps just the sheer number of bodies going into one restroom is skewing our data, or perhaps other variables such as the cleaning staff is throwing off our data, our findings. So what if I have research assistants in the restrooms with clipboards, watching if people wash their hands? Well, something else could happen, the Hawthorne effect. If you're being watched, you act differently. If I were to ask you, are you a good driver? Yeah, I'm a good driver. I don't speed, I don't cut people off. I'm a great driver, Trinidad. If I were to say, well, do you mind if I go in the car with you and watch you? I can pretty much guarantee you, if I'm in the car with you, your hands are at 10 and 2, you're observing the speed limit, you're wearing your seatbelt, you're not texting, you're not doing behaviors that perhaps you typically do because you're being watched. Now, if we end up doing this type of research where people with clipboards are watching if other people are washing their hands after they use the restroom, more likely than not, every single person leaving the restroom will wash their hands because they know they're being watched. You act very differently. It's a Hawthorne effect. So once we decide what method to use, we have to go through IRB, the Institutional Review Board at UTEP. This office makes sure our research is not harming the subjects. And not harming in the effect of we're not physically harming them, but also there's psychological harm. So any and all research done at UTEP must be sanctioned by the IRB. So you might be thinking to yourself, harm someone by watching if he or she washes their hands. How can I do that? Well, you can. If for some reason you are not going through IRB, you're doing your own research, you're going rogue, and you are spying on somebody, and you report to NIH, you report to the general student population that males that are Hispanic engineering majors tend to not wash their hands, and perhaps that population is rather small. Perhaps there's not too many male engineers that are Hispanics, and you target a certain restroom. You say on the third floor of the chemistry building, I've noticed that X number of Hispanic male engineering majors do not wash their hands. People could actually pinpoint who that is. Hey, isn't that you? Isn't that you, Ricky? Don't you usually use that restroom? Ugh, that's Ricky. Ricky, you don't wash their hands. Oh, Ricky, that's gross. You actually harm that person. Perhaps it's not even true. Perhaps it's somebody else that's doing it. But if you're not careful, Ricky could get very upset. Ricky could be bullied by other people. Perhaps not even true. Ricky does wash his hands. But because you're not doing research that's protecting the subjects, using confidentiality, perhaps you know who Ricky is, but when you release reports, you really shouldn't be telling people so much information that they could actually target or they could pinpoint who that person is. We have less females at UTEP in STEM majors. So again, if you release some sort of data and saying females that are STEM majors, that population is rather small. And if you start talking about a specific building, a specific restroom, someone could actually figure out who that female is. And again, psychologically, you could harm that person. Ew, gross, don't talk to her, or let's avoid her because she doesn't wash her hands. You're actually harming that individual. So it's not always physical harm. It could also be psychological. So hooray for you. IRB approved, well, I'm saying our research, but really it's your research. And you are now allowed to administer surveys and check restrooms sporadically. But you can never come into contact with students, staff, or faculty. Can't talk to anybody. You can give them surveys, but the only talking you're doing is just, will you please take my survey? That's it. You're really not asking them anything face to face. So we only have a month to do our research, and UTEP has lots of restrooms. Do you know that? Lots and lots of restrooms. And it's just you. Well, I'll help you out. So then it's just me and you. So where are we going to start? Well, the UTEP population would be every single student, staff, and faculty member employed by the university. We're not just targeting students, we're targeting everybody. So that's our population. Do you think realistically we can come in contact with every single person attending or employed by UTEP? Probably not. And just thinking about the restrooms, again, it's just a sheer amount of restrooms in the UTEP campus, and we only have a month. So what are we going to do? We need to create a sample. We can't watch every single restroom. It's impossible. In 1 month, we really can't do it. So we'd sample. Perhaps our first step would be to find out how many restrooms are actually on the UTEP campus. Everywhere. Every single place a UTEP student, faculty, or staff has a chance to interact with the restroom. So we have to make sure we have every single restroom accounted for. At that point, perhaps we give every single restroom a random number and we select perhaps 20% of the population. So now we have a sample. Not everybody, but just a sample. And I'm saying 20% would be an okay number. We have to also find out first before we make these decisions of how big our sample size should be. It could actually be a lot smaller, even 5%. But first things first, we need to make sure that we have an accurate count of all the restrooms at UTEP, all of them. The ones that you see are the ones that you don't see. And the ones that you don't see are going to be restrooms that are in offices that students really don't have access to, or faculty or staff that are not employed by a specific office do not have access to. So financial aid has restrooms in the back. The scholarships office, I think, also has restrooms in the back. Graduate school has restrooms in the back. So we have to make sure that we have a count of all the restrooms. And then again, quite simply, we pick a percentage, an amount that we actually want to sample from everybody. Population is everybody. Sample is a small amount of everybody. And then we'd give them random numbers, so then everybody has a fair shot of being included in our sample. And then we pick our sample. Perhaps we're picking restrooms at the Union, and we're picking restrooms in the Liberal Arts Building, and then some at the Sun Bowl, etc., etc. The same restrooms will also create our sample of the staff, faculty, and students. So not all staff, faculty, and students are on campus at a given moment. They don't all use the restroom. They don't all use the same restrooms. Some restrooms will actually be neglected, but that's part of our sample. We find out we have to be able to give every single restroom a fair shot of being included in our sample. We might want to do pairs though. So we want to have, if we pick a certain restroom, we want to have the male and the female restrooms because they tend to be close to each other in a certain building, certain floor, certain area. And our population of staff, faculty, and students would be staff, faculty, and students that actually use that restroom. So that's how we do. That's how we pick a sample from a population. But let's use a mixed methods, a qualitative and a quantitative survey. So one of our questions could be, what is your age? What is your classification? And just thinking about this, do you think we want to get accurate data, do you think we really want to have somebody there administering the surveys, giving out the surveys? I would say not. I would say that perhaps we might want to put stickers on the doors, the exits of the restrooms, and perhaps informing people you could possibly, if you want, you can be part of this research. Right outside the restroom on the table is a survey with a pen. It's totally anonymous. Do not give us your name, do not give us your ID number, and just answer a few questions. And perhaps we even give them, I don't know, a piece of candy if they fill it out, or they're on the honor system. There's a bowl of candy, and if they take the survey, they get some candy. Students tend to do this. Faculty tend to do this. Staff tends to do this. I mean, Not a big deal. You can put candy there. And as long as you give them something, some sort of incentive, people will participate in your research. So our questions could be close-ended. What is your age? What is your classification? What is your title at UTEP? What is the department you work for? It's quantitative. It's close-ended. Just answer choices, multiple choice. The age could be age groups. What is your age? 18 through 21, 22 through 25. So it's very quantitative, very close-ended. We can also include a qualitative component. Perhaps ask a question such as, what do you think are the benefits of washing your hands after using the restroom? It's open-ended. They can write a lot, they can write a little. What do I think are the benefits? Well, you don't get sick very often. It's not gross. People are more likely to talk to me. If I shake somebody's hands, I want to make sure that I'm not spreading disease to that person. Or I'm about to eat, I don't want to get myself sick. It's very open-ended. That's the qualitative component. So quantitative is more numbers, more close-ended. It's very easy to analyze quantitative data. Qualitative data is richer. You actually find out the whys. Why do people believe this? You're not giving them options. You're just letting them speak their mind. Perhaps things that you were not aware of or you did not think about will come up during the qualitative component. So after collecting our data, we can analyze our results. We can create a report and we can disseminate our findings. Again, hypothetically, perhaps we find males wash their hands less often than females. There's less soap, less paper towels, and we're looking through the surveys, and our surveys are also saying that the males are less likely to wash their hands than the females. So all we're doing, if we do this type of research, is all we're doing is finding out which sex washes their hands, more or less. We're still not making a connection to the flu. That's all we're doing. So at the end of 1 month, all we're going to be able to do to report to NIH is, hey, we found out among the UTEP staff, faculty, and students, males wash their hands less often than females. We still haven't made a connection to the flu. That's all we're doing. So how could we be dishonest in our data collection? And it's happened. I worked on several research projects, and it happens. People tend to be dishonest. People might want or may not want to believe that a certain sex actually washes their hands more or less often than the other sex. We can also be dishonest because within 1 month we might have pressure of finishing our research. We might actually start falsifying the data. We might start filling out surveys that weren't really filled out. We might fill them out ourselves and just say, well, here's 100 surveys of 100 students, and actually I did it in my office and I just put fake data. The pressure is you're getting paid $25K, but for researchers, one, it's funding, that's a big deal, which could lead to being dishonest in the data collection. But also faculty have pressure to publish, because if it's new faculty, they might be up for tenure. And when they're up for tenure, faculty, there's also pressure to publish. So again, you want to be able to publish, you want to be able to have data, you want to be able to keep your job, basically. So that could also creep into our data collection. People could actually be dishonest. But more likely than not, people are fairly honest, but any dishonest behavior tends to, for the most part, be by accident. I was not aware that I shouldn't be doing this. I was not aware that I'm actually tainting the data by watching the students, which is really why any and all research should be sanctioned by IRB, because they're kind of give you nice tips, and what you're doing right now could actually be tainting the data. It could be harming the respondents. You're not doing good data. What if you do it like this instead? They're nice people to speak to about research. So now let's go back to original hypothesis and test a similar hypothesis. So what if we wanted to see if there is a correlation between washing hands with soap, hot water, and alcohol-based sanitizer for 30 seconds after using the restroom and the spread of the flu? So let's set up a simple experiment to test the correlation above. So the book talks a little bit about the experimental and control group. The experimental group For our hypothesis will be people that will be instructed after you wash your hand, after you use the restroom, you need to wash your hands with soap, hot water, and alcohol-based sanitizer for 30 seconds. That's the experimental group. The control group is we do nothing to them. People that once they use the restroom, they do whatever they want. Perhaps they just wash their hands with just water, a little bit of water, a little bit of soap. Some actually do use soap, water, and alcohol-based sanitizer, but perhaps less than 30 seconds, some more than 30 seconds. But our experimental group, we're actually going to control them very much. We're going to tell them, you must use soap, hot water, and alcohol-based sanitizer, and you must wash for 30 seconds. That's the experimental group. So we want to test this at the UTEP campus. And now we just want to focus on students. So we'd get perhaps 100 students, 200 students. And again, we're not controlling for anything. Just get 200 students. The first 200 students that respond to our call for research. We promise these students, we'll give you guys $100 each to participate in research. And we have 200 students. These 200 students represent a sample. It's not the population of UTEP, it's a sample, because not every single student. But if it's random, we should come pretty close to representing the true student population at UTEP. Not everybody, because not everybody will be selected to be part of the sample. Perhaps you all will not be part of the sample because you're not on the UTEP campus. Perhaps you're somewhere else. And we might have students that take classes at night. We have students that perhaps just take Saturday classes. So not everybody has the equal odds of being part of our sample, but for simplicity's sake, we'll just say the first 200 students that pass by the union will be part of our sample. It doesn't represent everybody because not everybody passes by the union at a certain time, and not everybody wants to be part of an experiment. But a fairly simple experiment might be just going to the union. It doesn't represent everybody though. Keep that in mind. We take the 200 students, we give them random numbers, totally random numbers, and just by the random numbers, we decide everybody that has a number that ends in an even number is part of the experimental group. Everybody that has a number ending in an odd number is part of the control group. And we separate them, and we really don't tell them much. Because we don't want the Hawthorne effect. We don't want to tell them we're going to wash your hands after using the restroom. Because if we did, I'm pretty sure the Hawthorne effect would kick in. Both groups would be washing their hands thoroughly. So perhaps we tell them, we're actually going to test you how much water you drink. How much water you can drink in 1 hour. And that might actually force our subjects to use the restroom. So they believe all we're doing is really measuring how much water they're drinking. We're kind of being a little bit deceitful. But what we're really doing is we want them to drink a lot of water so they end up having to use the restroom. So within 1 hour, we tell them, here's one 16-ounce bottle of water, drink it. Every 10 minutes, you have to drink a 16-ounce bottle of water. That's a lot of water. And all they believe is that's part of the experiment, how much water they can drink. They're drinking water, drinking water, drinking water. And we're, again, being a little bit deceitful. We're watching them, we have clipboards, and they really think that's the experiment. And then later, all we do is, okay, well, the experiment's over. Feel free to use the restroom. And that's really where our research kicks in. So we separate them. We separate them at the union. The experimental group, regardless, males or females, go upstairs at the union. The control group stays downstairs, first floor. They also use the restroom. And we're watching them in the restroom. Or perhaps we're giving them surveys. Or we really don't want to watch them in the restroom. We give them surveys at the end. And the experimental group has a bunch of stickers all around, has actually access to soap, hot water, and alcohol-based sanitizer. Stickers telling them for 30 seconds, you must do this. But nobody's actually talking to them. It's just a bunch of instructions. And once they do it, they go outside, they take a survey, and we can actually start seeing if the spread of the flu is there. Perhaps we actually contaminate, which I doubt UTEP will allow us to do, but we actually contaminate the restrooms with the flu and see if it spreads the flu. And we're measuring the spread of the flu because afterwards we put them under a black light and we find out if they actually have the flu virus on their hands. We compare the two groups, the experimental and the control group. And at the end, we want to find out which group is more likely to spread the flu. And we actually measure how much of the flu virus they have on their hands. I doubt any of this would get approved by IRB, but that's one way to set up an experiment. So again, it's not the population of UTEP, it's the sample of the UTEP student population. It's not really representative of everybody because we were just at the union. Not everybody passes by the union. We go on a Tuesday perhaps. Tuesday at noon, we start recruiting people for our experiments. Not everybody's at the union at noon, so not everybody has an equal chance of being part of our sample. IRB will probably not allow us to actually contaminate restrooms because now we can actually harm students. Perhaps a student puts their hands in his or her mouth and actually contracts the flu virus. So now we're actually harming people. But the premise is pretty simple. We have an experimental control group. We randomly assign people to either the experimental control group. Control group, we do nothing to them. They do whatever behavior that we're looking at, regardless, no interference. The control group washes their hands the way that they want to wash their hands. The experimental group, we're conditioning them more. We're telling them really what to do. Use soap, use hot water, use alcohol-based sanitizer for 30 seconds. We're controlling the experimental group a little bit more. So that's a nice crash course of methods of research. I think the book does a very good job of explaining things about methods of research, but hopefully this gave you a nice little crash course. I'm pretty sure most of you have done research before, so this really shouldn't be new to you. And especially if you've taken an intro to psychology course, I'm pretty sure you're aware of experimental groups and random controlled trials, etc., etc. So quiz 2 opens on Thursday and closes on Saturday again. One forum this week. So far, so good. Again, I'm very happy. People are participating, and I'm really appreciative of the comments you're giving to other students. And again, I like it because although some of you are disagreeing with peers, it's very respectful. I think it's nice. Well, I don't agree with you, and because of this, it's not, I don't agree with you, and I just don't agree with you. There's always nice explanations behind it. Be mindful of the deadlines. A few of you kind of disappeared the second week of class, and again, there's consequences to doing that. Everything's really laid out clearly in the syllabus. So email me if you have any questions, but really the syllabus is a contract between you and I. So again, you need to be mindful of the deadlines. So this week, the forum will close on Thursday, but probably going forward, unless, again, we have Moodle doesn't work or we have another holiday on a Monday, will probably be 2 forums, one due on a Tuesday and the second one due on Thursday. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and email me if you have any questions. Enjoy your week.